Hey, this is Andrew Nemec with the Oregonian and Oregon Live. I'm joined, as always, by Eforce Football's Jordan Johnson, and this time we have a third man in the podcast, former Washington State quarterback, Eforce Football head coach Alex Brink. Jordan and Alex, thanks for being here, guys.
Yeah, buddy.
Thanks for having us.
The reason I wanted Alex here today specifically is, you played quarterback quite successfully at Washington State, and Wilsonville four-star quarterback Connor Neville just committed there. I know you've worked with him personally. I know you still have contacts with Washington State. How good of a fit is that for him? What do you see him doing, and how do you project him in Pullman?
I think it's a phenomenal fit for him for a number of reasons. I think first of all, everybody knows that Washington State throws the football. The Mike Leach air raid has been incredibly successful over the years. It's taken quarterbacks and kind of the pass offense to a whole new level. And I think Connor's going to really benefit from that, especially because last year Wilsonville made the transition to that air raid offense. Coach Gunther went and learned a lot of it from Washington State, and so that transition is going to be really seamless. And on top of that, I think Connor, as a pretty developed passer already, is going to be able to just kind of jump in. He knows the footwork, he knows the reads, all those sort of things. From a football standpoint, should be a really good fit. Plus, knowing Connor as an individual, Pullman and kind of the smaller town, less of the hype, less of the things around a bigger city and a bigger school. Those are things he wanted. So I think from a personal standpoint, that's a great fit for him.
He was in a weird spot because he had a Pac-12 offer, he had an offer from Boise State, I think he had an offer from Hawaii, and then for a quarterback, you kind of want to wait and see. There's a part of you that wants to see, like with any other position. If I hold out until December, do I get 4 more offers I didn't expect? But the quarterback position is very different now, and we're seeing guys commit sooner. And as a guy commits, if a player commits to Washington State, suddenly all the guys that had Washington State offers lose them. So you kind of have to jump on your offers a little bit more as a quarterback. How much do you think he struggled, and how much advice did you give about finding a balance between wait to get maximum offers and potential, but also jump on an opportunity when it's there?
Yeah, recruiting's a little bit of a different ballgame than it had been when I was coming out of high school, and even in the last 5-6 years, there is an element of kind of getting on board with a team and a school that has confidence in you, because the way it works, especially quarterback wise, is all the schools kind of offer like the top 10 or 20 quarterbacks, and then as those guys fall, that's when you see other guys start to fit in certain schools. Like I liken it to Sam Neuer last year and his commitment to Colorado. He, a lot of those schools were waiting on other quarterbacks, and Sam was kind of in that second tier, even though he was certainly as qualified as those quarterbacks. And as those quarterbacks started to go other places, that's where offers started opening up at places like Colorado and other spots. And so that's where Sam benefited. And when Colorado offered him, he jumped on that. So with Connor, it was, the conversation was, hey, if this is a place you feel comfortable with, they want you. They made the effort to reach out to you and get you up there last year and watch you throw and offered you on the spot at their camp. Why would you not want to go someplace where they want you that bad and not be the second fiddle guy because somebody else fell through at UCLA or UW or whatever? And so I think for Connor, it came down to the fit with the staff, the school, and in the end, all of those things combined with wanting to get it out of the way and just move on.
How much, I know you're very close with Washington State, how much were they able to say, hey, Alex, we'd like to see him develop a little more this? And since you're his coach, you can kind of work with them and give them feedback. Are you able to do that? Are you allowed to do that? How much have you had communication with Washington State about teach him this, help him with this, so you refine him into a very Washington State product?
I know the staff at Washington State really well, and I know them, on a personal level and a professional level, and so I know what they're looking for, whether they directly ask me to facilitate that with somebody. And so I think it's one of those things where I've been around their spring ball and their practices and their games and their meetings enough to know that, hey, if you want to be a successful, not just quarterback, but any position at Washington State, here's what they're looking for. And it's not even from a fundamental standpoint, just a mentality. One thing that anybody who goes to Washington State is going to find is that Mike Leach is an incredibly intelligent coach, but he also has very, very high expectations. It's not easy to play for him, and the staff of guys around him carry that same mentality. And so I think the biggest thing that I could pass on to Connor is just that, hey, when you go up there, you need to be mentally prepared to be ready to step in and compete, and every day is a competition, and that's any school you go to. But Washington State really carries that as one of their mantras, and you see that that's led to a lot of success for them.
Covered Leach's first year at Washington State. I was writing for a newspaper there, and I can absolutely attest to the fact that every day is a competition, and especially as quarterbacks, there's a level of, and it doesn't always come lightly, that how the blank did you miss that read? And it's one play in a whole practice, and Leach is on it. And it's not that he's mean to the guys. It's like, you have to be able to facilitate this offense, and we have to hit the inside receiver when he's open. You have to be able to see when we set up that deep route. You have to hit that pass. You can't miss that after we've been throwing short underneath to set something up. He's really good at that and can wear you down. One of the things Connor needs to have is a thick skin. How do you see him personality meshing with a very quirky personality and a very bright man in Mike Leach?
Yeah, it's that's a great question. I asked Connor the other night at one of our 7-on-7 practices, just real briefly. I was like, hey, what do you think of Coach Leach when you're up there and your conversations with him? And his first thing, he's like, man, I didn't know he had four college degrees. I mean, he's just brilliant. He's so interesting, and so I think Connor is kind of attracted to Coach Leach's, that mental side of it, and I think it excites him that he's going to be around somebody like that. So I think there's a ton of potential for that to be a really, really quality relationship from that standpoint. But there's no doubt that, Mike Leach is hard on his quarterbacks, and the expectations are incredibly high. And so when you step into that situation and you're the signal caller for a Pac-12 school, for better or worse, you get all the credit and all the blame, and that you just have to learn to handle it. It's like look back, I tell the story to a lot of guys I train. I mean, one game, my senior night against Oregon State, I threw 6 interceptions. It was one of the worst games I ever played in front of my last game in front of our home crowd. And then the next week I had to go play in the Apple Cup, and was fortunate to throw 5 touchdowns and win the game at the end. And that's the kind of ups and downs you go through. How do you manage that? Or do you throw that 6-pick game and then go have 6 more picks the next week, right? So it's that sort of mentality that I would like to hopefully pass on with Connor, and that he's going to learn when he goes to Washington State, is, to your point, have a thick skin and just be able to roll with the punches and continue to get better each day.
Staying in this Washington State theme, and I guess it really branches into Oregon high school athletes more than anything, but Washington State hosted a junior day this weekend, and you guys basically couldn't hold practice Saturday because of the numbers of guys that were there. I think it speaks to the product in the state of Oregon that I think 10 to 15 athletes went up to Pullman, to a Pac-12 school, to get noticed. How rare is that? Is that because of how good this class is? What do you guys attribute that to?
I personally attribute it to kind of the direction that Oregon high school football is heading. I think I think kids have a passion for football, and it's starting to show up. They're putting in the work with their high schools and in the off seasons, and that's starting to translate from a young age into now these guys are being able to get recruited earlier. I mean, not every guy that went up there was a guy that you would say, hey, I know he's a Division I Pac-12 type of guy, but a lot of those guys that went up there are going to play college football, and that's the really cool thing, is that 10, 15, 20, 25 guys have an opportunity to play college football, and way more than that, but just from that group that went up there. And I think, again, it's a testament to what high school coaches are doing, the commitment they're making, the weight room and the off-season work, and really trying to push these kids to say, hey, you can be a great basketball player, great baseball player, great football player, but if your passion is football, you can keep working on that year-round, and that's really helping guys excel.
Well, there were years that, like Elijah Molden was at the Houston Regional, so he wasn't there. Cody Shear was at Washington. Daniel Green and Isaiah Mullen weren't at Washington State's junior day. There were years that if 4 quality prospects didn't go up to a Pac-12 junior day, then that would have meant no Oregon kids were there. And yet, still 10, 15 guys. Jordan, how deep is this class, and how many of these guys do you think actually end up being Pac-12 players? I think I had it between 10 and 12 actually this year.
Yeah, well, we've referenced this class as being potentially the top recruiting class to come out of Oregon, so we'll see at the end, but it definitely has the potential to be at the very, very top of the charts. I mean, these are kids, when you look at Washington State, where even if they're not a scholarship kid, they could be a preferred walk-on kid. There's reasons to get up there separate from being an offer spot. I mean, USC, UCLA are not going to typically come offer our kids. So Washington State's much more realistic and still a Pac-12 school. So it makes a lot of sense for these kids to get up there, let them know who you are, let them know that you're interested, and then let the cards fall as they may as the offseason continues. But Washington State, in my opinion, is an ideal place for a lot of our kids down here, especially with a lot of the ties, Coach Brink and so on. So I think it was a very productive and good weekend for those 10 kids that made the trip.
One thing that I think is also a big piece of this, and this kind of goes back to the Washington State connection that I think has been really impressive from Mike Leach's staff, is Eric Mealy, who's the Northwest kind of recruiting area recruiter, has done an unbelievable job getting connected with these kids in the high schools around here. I mean, I've heard from a number of high school coaches that, hey, Coach Mealy's coming in, he's shaking my hand, he's looking me in the eye, he's asking me who we've got. He genuinely wants to know, and I think that in the past, even at Washington State and other programs haven't made that commitment. So that's a testament to Coach Mealy and Mike Leach saying, hey, we're going to focus on the Northwest and try and make that a priority for us. I think that's a really important piece.
Yeah, and speaking to that, it was seamless transition basically into what we were doing. I was going to do a news and notes kind of thing, and one of the main topics is Braden Lindsey, the Tigered cornerback, picks up his very first offer. It comes from Washington State. It didn't come from Eastern Washington or Idaho or Montana. Washington State was the first one to say, hey, you're a real guy, you're a real prospect, and offer. And I know, I talked to Braden, it meant a lot to him. Credit to Washington State, one of the big pieces. Jordan, how good could Braden be, and is he a guy that this might be it? Is he a guy that's going to get 10 to 12 Pac-12 offers? What do you see him doing in terms of recruiting over the next couple of years?
Yeah, I with Braden, I think before this interview goes live, he could have another offer. That's how good he is. I mean, I think he's going to have half the Pac-12 and a host of mid-majors. He's a guy that you can't teach speed. If you're running 4.45, 4.47, and you're only a sophomore, I mean, you could foreseeably be at that 4.4 flat or even the 4.3s before he's done. And speed, as you know, is huge. So I see Braden as, with continued growth and progression, as being a legit, he's a 4-star recruit and someone that is one of the more recruited kids in the country. We've talked about some of the guys that he's visited, Ohio State and Purdue, but from a Pac-12 standpoint and where he could end up, I definitely see him being one of the premier kids out of this region.
One of the things people don't realize is he ran a 4.47 laser timed 40, and people think, well, guys running the 4.3s every once in a while. Not laser time. That's a different ball game. That's comparing to the NFL Combine. And in the NFL Combine, the average prospect invited to the Combine at wide receiver runs a 4.5 flat. So he's running faster than the average NFL Combine receiver as a sophomore in high school. He's incredibly fast. He has a chance to be the fastest kid in the country or among the fastest kids in the country. But I just want to make that point. People think, well, that was almost a 4.5. That's not that fast. In a laser-timed 40, that's incredibly quick. Another piece of news was Marlon Tuipulotu's rise. We've talked about him for a long time. We've called him a blue chip prospect for a year now. Tom Lemming, formerly of ESPN, now with CBS Sports, swung by Central High School, got a look at him, and said he rivals Marvin Wilson for the top defensive tackle in the country. That's noteworthy because Marvin Wilson also happens to be rated the number 1 prospect in the entire country. Few hours after that, Marlon gets a phone call and gets invited to the U.S. Army All-American Bowl. Things have really blown up for Marlon. Alex, we'll start with you. How much do you know about Marlon, and are you surprised by his ascension this last week?
I don't know him personally. I know what I've seen on film and just kind of watched of him, and I'm not surprised by any means. For one, at his position, finding a quality defensive lineman that can step in and play early and still has room to grow is incredibly hard to find at the high school level. So when you look at a guy that has the physical development, has the strength, the speed, the mentality to play the position, I think it's easy to say, hey, there's no doubt that guy is, as you guys referred to it, a blue chip prospect. So I think the cool part is that on a national scale, he's getting that recognition and at a smaller school, and sometimes that doesn't always happen. And so for Tom to come through and recognize that, and for you guys early on to say, hey, we see this, I mean, that's something that speaks again to these kids putting in the development and the time. And so I think for Marlon, there's no doubt that he's going to be considered one of those top prospects in the country.
We did a podcast 2 weeks ago, and one of the things we both said was if Marlon gets a chance to shine on a national stage? Because he's a quiet kid. He's reserved. It's possible that he doesn't want to even try out at an opening regional. I think he will, but there's that off chance that he just kind of wants to keep things quiet. And we said if he does, more than any other kid in the state, he's got a chance to really rise. It seems Tom Lemming swinging by, a national recruiting analyst swinging by and saying, whoa, this kid's the real deal, did that for him. He's now nationally rated. Tom Lemming said he's a 5-star. I think he probably earns a 5-star on a couple sites. Jordan, do you think this now moves him into a different category where now we're, instead of talking about USC, Michigan, Oregon, we're suddenly talking about like, hey, Alabama, Georgia, every school, Ohio State, all the top schools in the country suddenly are going to be jumping on this guy in the next few weeks? Or is it going to be a few months? How is this going to develop, do you think?
Yeah, basically one of the best top recruits ever to come out of this state. We've compared him to Ndamukong Suh, Haloti Ngata. I mean, just those references alone are incredibly bold. So I think when you're watching Marlon's film as a sophomore, you're like, wow, this kid is a dude. But then when you start getting this justification with Tom Lemming, other media outlets, 5-stars, and this and that, you have plenty of other people that have seen him now and gotten a feel as to what his future is going to look like. And I think Marlon, as much as anybody, I mean, from a ceiling standpoint, has the potential to be the biggest or one of the biggest recruits to ever come out of this state. And we'll find out really quickly, but the opening and a few of those other events will be, big time for him.
I have to say, you argued with me for a while about you wanting to have Marlon the number one guy, and I stuck with Elijah, so credit to you again. You were right. But Elijah, in his own right, ran a 4.52 at the Houston Regional. It was really the big question mark with Elijah is, does he have that top-end speed? We know he's got that change of direction speed. We know he's got technique. He's got good hips, good feet. He's physical. The question was, what can he run in a 40? And he thinks he can even run faster than that 4.52. Does Elijah running that 40 do enough that it's still a debate even with as well as Marlon has done, or do we feel like now maybe Marlon's that number one guy? Jordan, go ahead.
Well, I love Elijah, just so you know. So I'm gonna go co-1, just for the sake of.
That's so cheating.
Yeah, whatever.
Cop out.
But anyways, yeah. So Elijah 4.52, 4.47, 4.58, whatever. Elijah's just gonna be. He's going to be one of the top recruits in the country regardless. He's one of those guys that I think, speed aside, obviously you got to have it, but I think he just has all of those other tools that you need, the intangibles, where he's still going to be the top recruit in the state along with Marlon. And I think Marlon's upside with regards to what he potentially does in college and the NFL is as high as I've seen or as close to I've seen as any high school kid coming out of here. So regardless, it's a win-win with either one.
So I'm reading co-leader. Elijah maybe right now is the more polished product, but Marlon has the higher ceiling. So if you had to rank them right now in a snapshot, Elijah's 1, Marlon's 2. But if you were projecting for 6 years from now, you might have Marlon ahead. Is that safe to say?
I think that's fair.
Okay.
Yeah, and that obviously is nothing taken away from Elijah. That's just.
Well, they're both 4 and 5-star Yeah, they're both really talented. The fact that it's even a discussion speaks highly of both players.
I think they're
certainly.
both going to spend minimum of 5 years in the league. So, I really feel that. And I think Marlon could be an all-pro and spend, be one of the top recruits to ever come out.
So, Alex, Marlon's gotten this attention. He's now a 5-star. He's invited to the U.S. Army All-American Bowl. We're both kind of saying it's still really close. Does that now mean that Elijah maybe deserves a little more love nationally than he's getting? I think he's rated outside the top 200 prospects on Rivals, on 24/7, I believe on Scout, but I'm not positive, but certainly out of the top 100. In your estimation, in your mind, seeing him day in, day out with Eforce football, is he a top 100 kid? Is he a potential 5-star prospect?
In my opinion, he is, and this is outside of, from my experience, having played, in the Pac-10, having played after college, just seeing, playing defensive back and playing corner is an incredibly difficult position, and a lot of guys get put in that position because they're really fast, or because a guy looks at them and he's like, hey, we're going to put you at a corner, and they make it for a long time because they have certain physical abilities. The guys that really make it are not the guys that just have the physical abilities. They're the guys that are incredibly intelligent, play the position very smart. They know as a defensive player as much as the offensive players they're going against about offensive schemes. And that's the thing that impresses me about Elijah. We can talk all day about speed and quickness and all these things. He has that base level of physical abilities that he needs to be successful. More importantly, he has the mental side of it that's been, coached through his dad and the coaches at West Lynn and his kind of development as he's gone along, that I think that's what separates him. There might be guys that are faster. There might be guys that are a little bit taller, a little bit stronger. There's going to be very few players that are going to be able to diagnose concepts, understand situation, down and distance, things like that, like Elijah does. And I think you're going to be hard-pressed to find a guy that's tougher than him. I've seen him playing banged up both in the high school season, in the 7-on-7 circuit, doing things, going above and beyond when he's banged up and still executing at a high level. I think that's a really, really impressive piece too.
Well, I know for a little while there was talk that maybe because he was in so much pain that his ankle, there might have been a broken, not that it was like completely fractured and tore up, but that he might have broken a bone in his foot or his ankle. And he was still wearing a metal brace and playing. I mean, he's a warrior, and I really have a lot of respect for Elijah. I think it's really tough to say which one's better. Elijah kind of blew up in his own right this weekend. He's the first Oregon player ever to be invited to back-to-back opening finals. He got invited this weekend at the Houston Regional. He wanted to test himself against, frankly, the best players in Texas, and he was one of 6 or 7 guys to get invited. So he's put himself on the map in his own right. So Elijah's nationally on the radar. Marlon's on the radar. Both of you, and I'll ask Jordan to answer first. Is there another guy that's about to blow up and be on that national radar? And if you had to guess, who would you say is maybe the next guy to pop that really leaps into that 4-star territory?
I mean, Alex Forsyth is the way he's going. I mean, it depends on obviously if he's an early commit or what he does there, but his the way he's trending right now, I mean, this kid's blown up. I mean, he's got majority of the Pac-12, and it looks like other schools, especially after this camp circuit gets underway, he's going to have some outside schools coming in as well. I mean, he's all that, and I think Alex would be a kid that could definitely, you could foresee him being, one of those national level high 4-star recruits. Demetrius Douglas, as Tom Levine referenced, called him, the top corner in Oregon.
It was bold. But
yeah,
Demetrius is really good in his own right too. They're both really talented. Obviously, Demetrius has offers from Oregon and Oregon State, so they're both Pac-12 players. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's a good group. I mean, up and down the board, the 2017 group is legit. So I think there's going to be a couple more kids. Jackson Kirkland, obviously 6'7", 305. You can't discount him, especially when he gets out on the national circuit. Once you get a couple of these big time offers from whether it's an SC or whoever, a lot of people come in as well. So it'll be an interesting offseason.
Alex, who's the guy? Is there a guy that you think could blow up and be national, or are we kind of done with the class of 2017 in terms of guys who are really going to blow up and be top 100 guys?
No, I think there's kind of another push here because, generally what you get from a recruiting timeline standpoint is that big push before spring ball starts, and then the coaches get into spring ball and there's junior days, but they're not as focused on recruiting, and then that time period after spring ball, kind of before their dead period and stuff, they really get out and kind of finish, really get some more of that recruiting done. So I would expect that, guys like, Jackson Kirkland, Alex Forsyth, and, even a kid like Cody Shear down at Sheldon, who's blown up kind of in his own right with a bunch of offers recently. Quality offensive line talent is really, really hard to find at the high school level. And so not only do these guys aren't just big body type of guys, they're very developed players, for high school offensive linemen. And I think that's a rarity. I know that Pac-12 schools are consistently looking for that. They don't want to have to develop a guy if they don't have to too much. And so I think that offensive line group has a chance to take another even step forward on the national scale. So I'm interested to see how that goes over the next month or two.
I think my picks, 2 guys to me stand out as potential guys who could jump into that top 100 pretty easily. Daniel Green, the linebacker out of Madison, I still feel like there's a push to be made for him. I think so many schools have sat back because of academics and kind of waited, and he's been open about that, so I'm not giving away any secret there. He's been refocused on his academic career and really genuine about it, that he wants to get his degree in college. Like, he cares now. And I think there's a chance that he jumps up for middle linebacker with his versatility, with his ability to open up his hips, turn, and cover. I think there's a chance that he jumps into the top 100. And as both of you guys mentioned, Jackson Kirkland being 6'7", 305 pounds. I saw him and watched him early in the fall and felt like he didn't totally get it. Like, when you have a guy and you see him on the field and he doesn't get how dominant his body can be. And I think in the playoffs he figured it out. And he was dominant to the level that people who just watch football to go to the games because, let's cheer on Jesuit. They were like, who is that big guy? And he didn't have the ball in his hands. And that's rare for the average fan to kind of be like, there's an offensive lineman here that's really good. That's how dominant he was. The average person was pointing him out. I think he has a chance to be a top 100 guy himself. Both those guys really talented. And then you wonder with Connor Neville, going back around to what we talked about in the very beginning, is there a possibility that he really shines at the opening regional and makes that Elite 11? I know that's his goal. He was at every day of practice at the opening last year. I'd love for him to get that chance and see him compete against the best quarterbacks in the nation, because when he's tested, when he's in a position, he can make all the throws, and it'd be interesting to see him on that big stage and see how he handles that. Guys, thanks for being here. One last thing. We were supposed to mention it earlier, and I forgot. Who's left on the board for quarterback talent in the class of 2017? It seems like Mike Irwin, who was from Mountain View, now going to Lake Ridge, is on the board. Summit's John Bledsoe. Anybody else, and where do those guys potentially end up?
Yeah, I certainly think those two guys are kind of in that next conversation. Daquan Dennis Lee at Oregon City is a guy that has all the physical tools. He's a guy that can continue to mature, but he's a multi-sport athlete, and so I think there's a place for him somewhere if he has another great year at Oregon City. But those two guys, Bledsoe and Irwin, are college ready guys right now. I think they're for sure Big Sky players. I think physically and mentally both of them could be Mountain West type of guys, and I have no problem saying that for both of them, if they get that shot, I believe they'll take advantage of it, because I think they're both physically gifted enough. But Bledsoe, being Drew's son, already has that pedigree, and Mike Irwin being a very steady player, having been a conference player of the year as a sophomore, I mean, he's a guy that I think has that mentality as well.
Jordan, Alex, thanks for being here. You guys have something big coming up here. I know you're going to LA this week for a 7-on-7 tournament, but there's a big event coming in the state of Oregon, in the Portland area, Memorial Day weekend. I don't know which one of you wants to talk about that, but I'm really excited for a chance to see all the best players in the Northwest, and they're coming to Portland for me. That makes it easy.
Yeah, it should be fun. We got all the Northwest top teams here, including Eforce. We got FSP, Ford Sports Performance, who actually went down to LA this last weekend, and their big regional tournament down there. And then Rise Football out of the Tacoma area. They'll be down here as well. So we'll have all the top organizations representing the Northwest, plus outside teams coming in from Cali, Canada, a host of other areas. And we're excited because to have all these athletes that we continue to talk about on a weekly basis on the same field from our region and outside of our area, just from a covering standpoint to a competition standpoint, I mean, it's going to be the real deal. We got DeAnthony Thomas and Darren Thomas kind of being featured guys there with all of our NFL and D1 coaches. So it's a pretty cool thing. Brink and the crew have done a great job kind of facilitating and making sure that this is put together, and you should pretty much see anyone and everyone out there.
What's the format? Are we doing pool play first and then a tournament? Are we jumping straight into tournament play? What's the layout if I'm an average high school football fan, or maybe obsessed football fan, and I want to come check out the best matchups and the best games?
Yeah, well, I mean, also just to jump on what Jordan was saying a little bit too, the cool thing is Saturday of Memorial Day, so the 28th, we'll be doing a 7th, 8th grade tournament, so some of the young guys are going to get to go. So it's pool play, created a seeded bracket, and then single elimination. So that's at Clackamas High School all weekend. And then Sunday is the high school tournament where those guys will be there. Same thing, pool play, then seeded single elimination tournament. So definitely a high intensity deal. Those programs Jordan mentioned, and then local high schools and local guys will be out there too, which is going to be. We did something similar last year, which is really fun to see some guys that play baseball, play basketball, run track. They don't have an opportunity to get out maybe during the off season, and this is kind of before spring football starts for a lot of these high schools, it's an opportunity for them to get together and compete. So it's open to everybody that's from the state of Oregon, from the state of Washington. We want to get all the top competition and have fun and compete. And like Jordan said, guys like Darren and DeAnthony are going to be out there with some other former Oregon and NFL guys, and it's going to be for a really, really fun weekend.
For people who don't totally know what this is, Eforce has all the top skill position players in the state. Between Rise and Ford Sports Performance, they have all the top skill position players in their state. So you're going to see, if you wanted to come on Sunday and check things out, you're going to see, is it safe to say 15 to 20 Pac-12, future Pac-12 players just in those 3 teams, let alone the rest of the field? And I don't know who's all coming, but there's potential to see future Oregon players, future Oregon State players. In fact, we know that's going to be the case because some of these guys have offers. Really exciting opportunity, and I know you guys have some other stuff coming up that's really exciting. Seems like Oregon football, 7-on-7 football, full season is really coming around, and Oregon is starting to catch up, and I think that's a credit and a tribute to Ford Sports Performance, to Eforce football. I think Oregon talent in part is getting better. Yes, high school coaching is better, but because these guys are able to do this year-round and compete against the best, and it's really exciting. So thank you guys for your effort getting this thing going.
Appreciate it.